What is elder abuse? In this episode of No Holds Barred, we're going to discuss the different aspects of elder abuse. The California legislature has taken a special interest in elders and elder abuse. In fact, dependent adults as well as people with disabilities all fall into the same category of elder abuse. In this case, however, we're going to just talk about elders. And under the statute, elders are people 65 years of age or older. What is elder abuse and how does it apply to those people 65 years of age and older? Well, elder abuse can be physical abuse, emotional abuse, certainly financial abuse. It can be abduction, abandonment, isolation, bullying, and many more categories, almost beyond imagination, the things that can impact elders in a very negative way. And as we've said, the California legislature, specifically in Penal Code Section 368, which is a criminal statute, has defined elder abuse. Let's talk for a minute about what we would do if we saw elder abuse or what we thought was elder abuse in someone that we knew, a friend, a relative. And first and foremost, we look at the police, report it to the police. But also there are many, many other places. There's Adult Protective Services, there's Medi-Cal and the Department of Justice. People look at these kinds of things. Mandatory reporters, health cares, people, therapists, teachers, daycare providers, care home providers, psychiatrists, a number of people who are mandatory reporters. What does that mean? That means if they see it or even have an inkling of elder abuse, they're required to report it. So let's go back for a minute and talk about what we would actually think about when we see someone who we believe is suffering some kind of elder abuse. And typically, you think of it from a physical standpoint. Well, grandma falls an awful lot, and I don't know, she lives in a one-story house. Why is she falling so much? And she's injuring her arm, and she has a twisted break, the kind that you would get if somebody grabbed your arm and twisted you and pulled you. So first of all, you look at that. Does somebody have bruises on their face? Do they have bruises on their body? Is there somehow, some way, this just seems unusual. So you take them to the hospital. You have a doctor talk with them. And it's important, and the doctors appreciate, that when somebody comes to the emergency room or urgent care and they're an elder, they don't want the family member or the caregiver necessarily in the room at the same time. They want to be able to evaluate the person. Why is that? Because many times that elder relies on the person who brought him in and is terrified to say anything to anyone that might in some way have them lose that care. So believe it or not, people don't report. Old people don't report in a wide category of abuses, but particularly physical. And they may just be terribly frightened of that person and they don't want to say anything. That's a real big issue. That's a real big issue. So there are lots and lots of things that people can do, and let's talk a little bit about, from a legal standpoint, and certainly lawyers often talk about it, let's talk about what you can do. Well, the first thing is you can make a police report, and in many cases there will be a filing, whether it's through Adult Protective Services or through the police department. There is a filing, a criminal case brought against somebody for abusing an elder, let's say from a physical standpoint. So that process, many times from a civil standpoint, a lawyer can piggyback on that. So somebody has been prosecuted for abusing an adult, and then later a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit against that very person. Because in a criminal case, the sanction is what? The sanction is they get punished, they go to prison, they go to jail, whatever. Civil is collecting money, and that's what the civil aspect or the civil side of it is. Also, you want to think about restraining orders. Very important the necessity potentially of going into court and getting a restraining order against an abuser or against a healthcare provider, against a caregiver, against a relative, and those kinds of things. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. But first of all, let's just talk about an example. Let's talk about physical abuse. Looking at somebody going into their home and seeing, and let's say an example is they live in their home. And we've had several cases of somebody living in their home, cared for by a relative. And I will say at this point, the largest percentage of physical abuse of elders is by a relative. Next is caregivers. So you think a relative is taking advantage of an elderly person. It may be a parent, and they're impatient with them. They get angry. There are issues of the caregivers are very important. But you look and you see the home is dirty. The elder is losing weight at a rapid pace. That means they're not eating. Their hair is dirty. They're not clean. And that's immediately a signal that something is wrong here. And then trying to talk with that elder, don't want to talk about it. Anxious to not say anything. And particularly anxious when their caregiver or their relative is around. So we've seen those kinds of cases many, many times. We had a case in which an elder had a great deal of money, and her daughter and her husband and her daughter's husband lived in the house. And over time, the woman deteriorated to such a degree that she ultimately died, and she died from dehydration and lack of eating. So she wasn't being hydrated, and she died. And an investigation by Adult Protective Services came to the conclusion that the daughter was taking her money and spending it. They were abandoning her. There were days and days and days when they weren't even there. They were off on vacation, they were off somewhere. And this woman died. They were prosecuted for this elder abuse and sent to prison. And that's probably the worst kind of example I could give you, but a real example that actually happened. So in many cases, we look at the physical part. Physical can be at a care home. We have cases in which a elderly person is at a care home, develops bed sores, develops all kinds of issues, and that shouldn't happen. They should be turning, so we often look at cases, and we've seen many, many cases of abuse in a care home. Sexual abuse in a care home is a common theme. And you wouldn't think that, but just people that are disabled, that can't care for themselves, that can't fend off somebody, and somebody coming in and feeling them. So a care home case that we had a number of years ago in which a janitor at the care home was fondling this elderly person regularly, and she would describe it, and they thought, oh, foolishly, this person is just making this up, she wants attention. But they put a camera in the room, and guess what? Sure enough, that is exactly what took place. In this particular situation, there was no penetration or anything. There was fondling. Initially, it was investigated as a misdemeanor fondling case, but this was a dependent person. It rose to the level of a felony, and significant. I do want to talk for a minute about the issue of potentially abduction. And abduction is, we had a case of a woman who owned her own home, was actually doing pretty well. Her daughter, again, unfortunately in this case was a daughter, coerced her into selling her house and moving out of state to another state where the daughter wanted to go. And we actually looked at that and considered it an abduction. She actually took her money after selling the house, bought a house, moved the elder to a whole nother state away from all of her friends and all that. And I think we could and did make the case with Adult Protective Services that this was an abduction. The person did not want to go. Initially was frightened, but decided that there was nothing much to do until the relatives back in California said, wait a minute, what is going on here? I want to really talk about financial elder abuse, and that's something we see so often. And it kind of goes into the idea of estate planning. What happens when a person gets elderly, sometimes they forget to balance their checkbooks, they forget to take care of things. So a relative will step in and say, tell you what, put me on your bank account, I'll pay all your bills, I'll kind of watch over things. And we see that so often that those checking accounts get drained, the bank accounts get drained by the relative. And we have a place called Rossmore here in Contra Costa County in Walnut Creek, and we used to get a number of cases when I was in the district attorney's office of the caregiver. So a person would say, here's my checkbook, go down to the local Safeway store and buy some groceries. Well, they would go down and buy groceries for themselves as well as the elder, and they buy other things, and pretty soon they start using that checkbook, and next thing you know, the elder's checks are bouncing, there isn't sufficient money to pay the rent and all that. Well, because the caregiver was draining, and that's a big thing. So I'm talking about examples because I want you to all understand how wide-ranging this elder abuse, I call it crime, can take place. But on the civil side also, same issues. And what is the goal? The goal is to get the money back, put the elder back in a position that they were before they were taken advantage of, and whether it's abduction or physical or financial, it all comes down to the same thing. An elder is being abused, and improperly, and it's important to try to recognize that and see what you can do to rectify it. Now, I will say the abuse is something that, once recognized, sometimes is very difficult to undo. Money has been spent, money is gone. The relative or the caregiver who took it really doesn't have any assets. They just spent the money. Maybe they have a drug and alcohol problem, but a very, very troubling set of scenarios. So one issue I do want to talk about, and I recommend oftentimes when we talk about estate planning, is for someone to get a power of attorney. And so an elder will sign a power of attorney for someone to care for them. And there are powers of attorney. The general power of attorney, you can go right to the website, download it in California, and all these different boxes you can check, or you can check the very last box saying all of these things apply up above. The person can sell my property, the person can pay my bills, the person has the complete power. And that's not a durable power of attorney, that's a general power of attorney that gives that person the same powers as the elder. And in that case, the elder doesn't have to be incompetent. The elder doesn't have to, it's just they're sharing. So we want to say that if there is a power of attorney, you want to make sure that the person who's handling that is trustworthy, and it's only for that particular purpose, and you want to review that as many times as you possibly can over time so the person doesn't take advantage. A durable power of attorney for health care requires that the elder be incompetent in some fashion. So be so sick and lose consciousness, become incompetent, perhaps dementia, something like that. And then it only comes into play for the person who has that power of attorney while the person is incompetent. If they come back out of it, let's say they were unconscious, they had some disease for some period of time, and that works. After that, it no longer applies unless there's a general power of attorney. So thinking of all of this, very, very careful when elders look at providing power to somebody by a power of attorney. Talking about elders, obviously the issue of dementia or incapacity comes into play. And you can find somebody who's incapacitated with, let's say, Alzheimer's. And we had a case in which a caregiver took a woman down to the local bank and had her sign over a check for $8,000. And the question was, did the bank allow it? The bank did allow it. But the bank knew that this person didn't have capacity. So rather than going after the person who took the $8,000 who didn't have anything, we actually filed an action against the bank. The bank had no business. And as a bank, they should certainly have recognized when a person, an elderly person was brought into the bank by a caregiver and persuaded to write a check right there. Red flags certainly should have arisen. And unfortunately, they didn't. And surprisingly, the bank allowed this to happen. Critically important that people take a look and ensure that an elder is not being taken advantage of. Another real big issue is in estate planning. Let's say a person has prepared a will and a trust, and it's all very nice, taken care of. The money is to be taken care of in a certain way. There's a trustee. Let's say the elder has been diagnosed with, let's call it again, with Alzheimer's. And then all of a sudden, a person comes and says, well, the elder wants to change her will and name me and give some of her estate to me, and goes to a lawyer. That lawyer has to be incredibly careful and understanding that this person has dementia and doesn't have the capacity to change the law, to change that trust or that will. And very, very important. So I had a case in which somebody was diagnosed with early onset of Alzheimer's. I had a discussion with her. She wanted to change her will. And I said, all right, we will take you to a lawyer, and you're going to sit in the room with the lawyer, and he's going to have a discussion with you, and he's going to decide whether or not, at this stage of your disease, you know and understand what you're doing, you understand the consequences of what you're doing, and you're changing your will, and whether or not he is willing to go, in this case it was a male lawyer, he is willing to change that will for you. And I'll tell you, the moral of that story is that lawyer was not. And he made a determination and said that given the diagnosis, even though it appeared that she's in the early stages of it, I am not going to be the one to change that will and that trust, just because I'm concerned that it seemed that she seemed to have the capacity, but I was not going to be. And I was happy to hear that when I heard that, because then that person, the elder, came back to me and said, this lawyer won't do it. And I said, well, that's not my area, but it's certainly not something that I would do, and that's why I sent you to this lawyer. So I think you're just, you came up with a good plan in the past. It seems to be a good plan now, and you're not going to be able to change it. And some people would disagree with me on that, saying, well, she had the capacity. I did have another case in which a person was in the early stages of some kind of dementia, but still drove a vehicle, still did a number of things, and sent her to a lawyer. And in fact, that lawyer, not the same person, did make a small change in the beneficiaries in a will, not substantial, but that lawyer felt that it was appropriate. Years later, that person died, the elder died, the will and the trust went through the trust process, and everything worked out just fine. So thankfully, there was no issue. But critically important, obviously, to consider the mental capacity of that elder. And that's oftentimes what the police do. We had a case not too long ago in which a person persuaded an elder to go into business with him. And an elderly woman, who was a widow, and don't know why, but she went into business with this person. She funded the business, and after a period of time, it became clear that this person was taking advantage of her, actually had drained her retirement account, one of her 401k accounts, drained it, and purchased vehicles, did a lot of things. And clearly, from my experience as a former prosecutor, having headed a unit that handled elder abuse, and particularly financial elder abuse, went to a police agency in another county nearby and explained everything. And they said it was a civil matter. And I was flabbergasted. A civil matter? Well, they said they had this agreement, and here's, well, it was never put into writing. No lawyer had come and done anything, and I said, it's not a civil. But if that county doesn't want to prosecute, that's fine. We will go ahead and go directly to the district attorney's office in that county, and they have an elder abuse section, and their people looked at the case and said, well, clearly it was financial elder abuse, and they filed an action, and they're working to try to, as we speak, recoup some of the money. Unfortunately, most of it was spent. Some of the money that was, I say, stolen from her. And I say stolen because she had no business going into business with this person. She had no expertise. The only thing that she had was a bank account. And that's the only reason why this person wanted to, I'll say, take advantage of her. And in fact, that's precisely what happened. Took advantage of her. We've spoken a lot about elder abuse here today. We've spoken a lot about the signs, the things to look for. We've spoken about the categories of help that you might get. And again, I'll go back over adult protective services is perhaps the first order of business, the first place to go, because in many cases they have experience, they recognize, and they know where to send an elder. In some cases, they just need counseling, they need to talk to a lawyer, they need to talk to a therapist, but adult protective services is very good. Unfortunately, many police agencies aren't really equipped. Hopefully they're equipped enough to say, we're going to send you to adult protective services, or we're going to refer you over to the district attorney's office, or the state of California through Medi-Cal will do that. But very, very important. If you're a lawyer and a practitioner and you think that there is a case of some elder abuse, don't be afraid to refer it out to somebody who specializes in that. There are a number of them. If you're just a relative or friend and you suspect that something is going on and your elder relative doesn't want to talk to you because they're fearful, they're frightened for whatever reason, don't be afraid to reach out. Reach out to local lawyers, reach out to adult protective services, certainly reach out to the police if you have no other way to go. I will talk about the issue that comes up where siblings are fighting. And siblings are fighting about who is going to take care of mom or dad. And there's a will and a trust. And one relative is thinking that, well, wait a minute, the person that's named to take care of my father, for example, is never there, is not taking care of them, is not doing. In that particular case, and we had a case just like that, the sibling went to the court and sought a restraining order and asked for the court to get involved in restraining the trustee from spending any money without the court reviewing this or sending it out to somebody who does an ombudsman for somebody in a care home, or in this case, a trustee. And there are people that do this for a living, that actually will handle an estate of a living person, help them to pay their bills. There's a cost intended upon that, but sometimes you need to take it away from the relative or the person that's named in the trust, or the person that is named in that power of attorney, and get things straightened out so that an elderly person can live their final years in some kind of comfort and some kind of understanding that their money isn't going to be stolen from them, they're not going to be abused, their relatives or caregivers are going to take care of them in the time that they have here on earth. Thank you for watching this discussion on elder abuse. If you believe that a loved one, a friend, a relative may be experiencing elder abuse, don't hesitate to contact our office and we can discuss your legal options. See you on the next episode of No Holds Barred.